everybody. Thank you for having us. It's a joy to be here, truly a joy to be here. And and thank you for sharing this delicious dinner with us. That was absolutely fantastic, so I appreciate that. I have to say that a while ago, Sue Ross and I were talking, and somehow the subject came up about polio. And I mentioned to her that I'm a polio survivor. What Sue shared with me, and I didn't know it at the time, was Rotary Club's involvement in the total eradication of polio worldwide. So, from my heart, I thank you. Sue, excuse me, Sue asked me to come tonight to tell you my story. I have to admit, I'm not a public speaker. And so I have to say that if this doesn't go well, or you get really, really bored, Sue's the one. Well, anyway, to get started, I need to read you something. And so bear with me. This little brief review helped me because I had to research some things. Even going through it at the young age I did, there's a lot of things I didn't know, a lot of things I wasn't told. And so this really brought a lot of things back that I didn't know, number one, that I went through, number two, and that I apparently just wanted to forget. But I would like to say that for some of you, and if not all of you, already know this information, but I'd like to use this as somewhat of a timeline about what was going on in the area and around the world from the 1950s to the present time. This is a quote from the World Health Organization. Polio is an infectious disease contracted predominantly by children that can lead to the permanent paralysis of various parts of the body and can ultimately cause death by immobilizing the patient's breathing muscles. End quote. There's no cure. No cure exists from the symptoms. But in the 1950s, effective vaccines were developed and have been used around the world since then. By March 1955, the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, known as the March of Dimes, invested $25.5 million in research in Salk's inactivated polio vaccine development, in the 1954-55 clinical field test, which I'll talk about in a minute, and free vaccine for thousands of children. By 1957, following massive immunizations promoted by the March of Dimes, the annual number of polio cases in the U.S. was reduced from 58,000 to 5,600 cases. In 1962, Albert Sabin's oral polio vaccine containing weakened or attenuated virus was licensed and ready for distribution. In 1988, the Global Polio Eradication Initiative, the GPEI, was launched for the goal of eradicating polio by the year 2000. The GPEI pulled off an astonishing feat with the biggest single vaccination offensive ever by vaccinating over 80% of all the under 5s in the world each year. This involves giving 2 million doses of OPV to 55 million children in 94 countries. The numbers were staggering. In 1991, with the support of the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, Rotary International, and using Sabin's oral vaccine, the goal to eradicate polio from the Western Hemisphere was realized. In 2011, India was declared polio-free. Wow. And as of July 2021, polio is only endemic in Afghanistan and Pakistan and in some parts of northern Africa. Okay, where are we now? Oh, okay. Okay. So, faster than I am. Okay, these are some of the terms that you'll be hearing throughout what I'm talking about. Okay, honey. Vaccine, keep going. Eradication, the virus, endemic, and paralysis. And you can read there the definitions of what these are. Endemic, big word, and the virus that causes these infections. So, that's me. My dress was pink, and my bow was pink. And I thought I'd just tell you that to add a little color. But I was 6 years old then, and during that time, when I was 6, that would have been 1954. So during the 1950s, I came from Olean, New York, and Olean had a lot of population back then, twice what it is today. And some of you will remember some of the things that was happening back during the 1950s. Those tail fins on those cars, pretty cool. 57 Chevy, I mean really, that was a cool car. And during the 50s, we enjoyed things on TV like the shows that were like I Love Lucy, Gunsmoke, the Ed Sullivan Show, which had actually been on since 1949, but anyway. And of course, Leave It to Beaver. And there she is, June Cleaver, in her beautiful house dresses with her pearls. I have to tell you, I never saw my mother vacuuming in pearls. But there she is. But during that very charmed period that we lived in, there were things to fear. One of those things was the atom bomb. And the reason for it was we were involved in a Cold War with Russia. We were involved in the Korean conflict. So there were things that made our moms and dads shake in their shoes and be concerned about their children. And for example, maybe some of you remember this too, the air raid drills that we had in school. Weren't those fun? I mean, so what our teachers told us to do, as you remember, was if you hear, for all of you young ones that are here and didn't go through this, if you hear the sirens, you crawl under your desk. And put your head down. Yeah. I mean, can you just really imagine that? I happened to think about that, and I thought that must have been just about as effective as climbing a tree in a tornado. I can't even imagine. So thank goodness we didn't have to use our desks for an air raid or bomb shelter. But that's some of the things that they were concerned about. But second in line, biggest coming through, was polio. And parents were concerned about their children getting this. Word was out, it was moving fast. Now just really quickly, this kind of got out of place I think, but anyway, to tell you I came from an average family. Mom, dad, 2 sisters, a brother. I attended an elementary school, number 4 in Olean, had a lot of friends, a lot of kids were running around then. We were the post-war kids, and I think we multiplied like rabbits. We were just all over the place. Well, now we come to the serious part. Before the salt vaccine was approved in '55, there was a voluntary, remember the word, clinical trial in 1954. Now, Salk was against giving a placebo. He wanted all the children in this study, this double-blind study, to be given his live vaccine. And then compare the results with the general population. That's what he wanted. Well, he didn't exactly get that. Because, let me just go to this. The National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis required a scientific double-blind test. So he lost that part of it. He didn't want that, but he had to agree to have this test done so his vaccine would be approved and used. Well, interesting information. There were 700,000 children in 44 states that were given the vaccination. 419 were vaccinated, so that's about half, with the Salt vaccine. There were 57 cases of polio reported, but no deaths. 330,000 children were given the placebo, and that was a saline solution, placebo that they were given. 142 cases of polio were reported, 16 deaths. The conclusion, Salt vaccine was between 80 and 90% reduction in the polio risk, or the polio that was in the area in the United States at the time. Well, there's a little interesting fact there that when, it's a personal note. I can remember going into the gymnasium of my school, and maybe some of you can too, if you received the vaccination. And some of the children were ushered into a gymnasium, others into the armories in the area. And I remember walking in, and there was a nurse standing there, and she was directing the children to go in one lane or another. And we were obedient children back then, so we just followed what they told us to do, and we got in line and received our vaccine. What was interesting to me, not then, but later on, was parents gave their permission for their children to receive a vaccination, even though they didn't even know if it was safe or effective. But they kept telling us they loved us. So, but we went through and had the vaccinations. Well, those were the results of those 700,000 children that received the vaccination. Now, with some of them, and I checked with my husband too, some of the children in some of the states received the certificate. I never received a certificate. My husband said he remembers receiving the vaccination, but he didn't get a certificate either. But I'm not sure if that was just in some states or whatever. Don't have that information. But we did not receive the certificate. What I received was polio. So whether I got the placebo or the vaccination of Salk's vaccine, I can't tell you. When we walked into that gymnasium, we were told to get in one line or the other, and that we would get a number. Well, later on years, I thought about that. I thought, gee, that must have been something like Auschwitz, where you're ushered in, given a number, and then you're inoculated. So, early summer, 1954, I got very sick. I remember waking up in the morning, and I was probably crying. Of course, I cry when the flag goes by, but at that time, I was very little. And I didn't feel good. I was very, very sick. Had a very high temperature, felt sick to my stomach, and I just ached. and I can't even describe the pain. My back ached, my legs ached terribly. So I probably called my mom, and she came upstairs. We have a 2-story house, and she came upstairs and asked me what was going on, why I was crying. I told her I didn't feel good, I felt sick to my stomach, and she goes, well, we need to get downstairs. We had a bathroom downstairs, and I was upstairs. So she helped me by pulling the covers over and said, okay, come on, Cathy, it's time to get up and we'll go downstairs. She held my arm a little bit. I got to the edge of the bed, I stood up and fell completely down. Could not stand up at all. And so then she screamed for my father, and my mom could scream. So Dad probably took 3 steps at a time coming up to see me. He asked me, he said, honey, what's going on? And I said, Daddy, I don't feel good. I know I remember telling him that and just looking at him. And my mom said to him, she cannot stand up. Well, my dad just scooped me up, and my mom called my grandmother, who lived next door, and she came up to watch my 2 sisters, my brother, and they scooted me off to the doctor. Now back then, remember, you went to the doctor. There weren't urgent cares, and you didn't call an ambulance unless you were about half dead. So they just scooted me up and we went to the doctor. And it was Dr. Margaret Halley, if anybody knew them from Olean. Fantastic doctor. And she looked at me and went into the other room with my mom and dad and talked to them for a few minutes, and I'm just laying there with this thermometer in my mouth. And came back out, and the doctor said to him, take her to the hospital right now. And I remember those words. And I just looked at my mom and dad, but I thought, oh, they're gonna be with me, it's okay, I'm fine. And so we went to the hospital immediately. The doctor said, I will call them and let them know you're on your way. Well, when I got there, they put me in isolation. And this isn't me, but it's very similar. I don't have any pictures of me then, but it's very similar. That window is real. Those panes in my window were not there. But it was a big plate glass window, and I could see my mom and dad on the other side, and kept wondering, why aren't they coming in here? And I was a good girl, I just laid there. And back then, nurses and doctors didn't tell you a whole lot about what was going on as a child. May have told my parents, and maybe my parents thought they'd scare me if they told me anything, so I didn't hear anything from anybody. I was just laying there in bed. What's interesting about this, if you see the person way to the left in the white uniform, that was a nurse. And she did not have a mask or gloves or even a lab coat. She didn't have anything like that. She just had her nursing uniform on. My thought is that this was called infantile paralysis. So many of the adults probably thought, I'm not going to get it, I'm an adult. This is an infantile paralysis. And it's a virus. It'll go away and everybody will be fine. So they didn't hazmat up to go in. You remember during COVID, during our recent epidemic of COVID, where you could see the doctors and the nurses come into the rooms of the patients they were taking care of, and they looked like something from Star Wars. They had all these hazmat outfits on and everything, and you could hear the respirators go in and out and everything. That was now. It wasn't back then. Well, they put me in isolation. That's where I had to stay. And my mom and dad went back home, and I could see them leaving, and they were waving to me, and I'm sure I cried. And when they got back home, I don't know if it was that day or if it was sometime later, but my whole family was quarantined, so couldn't go anywhere at that point. Well, for my hospital treatment, I received injections of something, I'm going to say penicillin. To be perfectly honest with you, I don't know. Penicillin would have been effective if it was a bacteria, but this was a virus. So I'm not sure. I do know that they took blood a lot from me, and I had a lot of shots. I also, I remember this vividly, that I had a spinal tap. And they were looking to see if I had polioencephalitis, which would have gone to my brain and I would have died. Or if I had poliomyelitis, meningitis, and it affects the myelin sheath. So they were checking me for poliomeningitis, and that would have affected my extremities, and I would have been paralyzed and possibly in a wheelchair for the rest of my life. So they were testing me for that. I also received physical therapy, and how that came about was one day, and this is after I'd been in the hospital for a while, one day a gentleman came in my room by the name of Tony Torrey. And I don't know if any of you are from Olean or have ever heard of this gentleman, but he was a licensed physical therapist. And back then, he may have been the only licensed physical therapist in Olean at the time. I do not know for sure. But he was there. Excuse me, he came in my room, introduced himself, told me I could call him Tony. And he worked with me day and night. He instructed nurses that when he wasn't there, I was to have physical therapy, exercises, massage, move her legs, exercise her arms and her legs. You need to do this. And so he taught them how to do this. So I received physical therapy almost around the clock. And I remember, I remember it hurting a lot. But I didn't give up, and Tony never gave up on me. He just kept giving me physical therapy and coming in often. There was one day when Tony came in and he said, "Okay, Kath, today you're gonna walk." And I looked at him and thought to myself, I didn't say it, because I was a good girl. But I looked at him and I thought, no, I'm not. I don't think so, not today. Because it still hurt a lot. And he goes, no, today you're gonna walk. Okie dokie. So he helped me to be on the side of the bed, leaning against the bed. He said, okay. And he was he was closer than what you are to me right now. And he had his hands out. And he said, okay, take a step. Take a step. Okay. So I took a step, and I actually took a step. So he said, okay, take another one. So I took another one, and I did. And his hands were just right here toward the end of mine, and I looked, because he had big hands, and I could remember that. And I thought, good thing. I took one more step, and I started to fall, and he grabbed me. My legs, I can't describe it other than pain was really strong, but my legs were shaking like jello. And if any of you have overworked out, you get that feeling where your muscles are just shaking. Mine did that a lot. So they were shaking, but he caught me. And he said, Cathy, you are never going to wear braces. You are never going to be in a wheelchair. You are going to walk. And I remember him saying that to me. He just looked right at me, and I remember that part. I learned later, a little while later, and I'll explain to that in just a second, that Tony did not believe in putting children in braces immediately after they were diagnosed with infantile paralysis. He believed in giving them physical therapy, of working their muscles, because if you put them in the braces too early, he said, I quote him, the legs, your muscles will atrophy. You are not getting the exercise that you need to have, and it'll just, weaken your muscles, and you won't ever walk. You'll be in braces forever. Now, did that happen with all of those children that have polio? But maybe some. I don't know. But I know that was what Tony believed, and he worked with me, and I never wore braces. I didn't. And I didn't have to go in a wheelchair, except when the nurses took me down to the plate area. I would ride in a wheelchair then. But other than that, he worked with me, and he got me walking. So I owe a lot to Tony, the board above. And so he did that a lot for me. But this I don't want to leave out, because this is really kind of an important part of what was going on back then. Excuse me. I need to read you this. The iron lung was an apparatus for promoting artificial respirations, a primitive respirator of sorts. During COVID, the modern respirators were used to prevent pneumonia. Unfortunately, during polio, while someone was in the iron lung, the loss of swallowing and coughing reflexes, pardon me, made them more prone to pneumonia. This is why children died, many of them. Pardon me. Not that they were receiving bad care, but that pneumonia overtook them. And Tony, walking me, working with me, getting me up, and I really didn't want to get up, got me walking and breathing. Because at one point, my breathing, this is right after Tony came, or possibly before a little bit, my breathing must have worsened. Because one day, I remember so vividly, they rolled the iron lung into my room, and I saw it. It was a little scary, this big silver tube in there, and I kept looking at like, that's not really too much, doesn't look too much like a playhouse, so I don't know. But I was thinking that it would be okay. But I looked up at my mom, and she was crying. So I think my mom knew that if I went in there, I wasn't going to come back out. So it was shortly after that Tony, exercising me so much, getting me up and saying, breathe, breathe, you can breathe hard, breathe in. And he would do funny things, little jokey things with me to make me breathe and walk. And so I did not have to go in that. I did not. And that was such a joy. This is what was going on in other countries and other parts of the United States as well. Once again, notice the nurses and the aides, and all of those iron lungs. I was in isolation. Polio was something to be feared. It could be caught by contact with someone else. And there they were, with no hazmat outfits on. So they had a lot of children in iron lungs. So after several weeks, and I was told I was in the hospital almost 3 months. I don't have those direct dates, I'm sorry, but it's many weeks. And finally, I was discharged, and I was able to go home, play with my friends, go back to school, and I was very happy. Now I have to tell you a little addendum here to the Tony Torrey story, just very quickly, without boring you all, was after I grew up and went to nursing school, when I graduated from nursing school, I found out that they wanted to hire a nurse in the physical therapy department. And I thought, that sounds interesting. I had that. I think I could do that. So I applied, and they called me in for an interview. So I went to the physical therapy department, St. Francis Hospital, and walked in, and the person behind the desk said, come in, sit down. So I did, and I sat down. This person was looking at my application, looking up at me, and looking down at my resume, and looking up again. All of a sudden, and you, and that's all I got out of it. He sprung out of that chair like somebody, was out of an aircraft. And he came over and he took my hands and he just held them, and he was shaking. He just held them. And he said, "Oh my goodness, it's you. And he said, "So how are you doing? How are the legs? How's everything going?" And I said, I'm fine. Thank you, I'm fine. It's because of you and Lord God. And so I thank you so much. And so we talked a few more minutes, and he goes, "Oh, by the way, you've got the job." And so I started working for him, and a few months later, he has an office in Olean, physical therapy office in Olean, and he said, I need a nurse in my office. And he said, I'd like you to be there. And I said, so I would have to give up this job here? I said, oh, no, we're going to work around all that. He said, no, you stay here and you just come and work for me in my office. So I had both jobs for quite some time until I ended up getting married and moving out of the area. So I worked for Tony for quite a while, and it was a joy, total joy. He's a miraculous man. And so I would like to just read this really quickly. The Center for Disease Control partnered with other agencies such as Rotary International through the Global Polio Eradication Initiative, which you had mentioned earlier. And the cases of polio were down 99% globally. The last endemic case was in the U.S. was in 1979. And as I had stated earlier, polio was only endemic in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and just a few areas in northern Africa I have read and found out. We have a link here, if any of you want it, for the global immunization, polio being eradicated in India, and that's a good video to watch. I also have a book that we got some information. I didn't write it, so I get nothing for this. But this is a grand book to read about polio, if any of you are interested in it. There's some other credits here to Olean Times Herald newspapers that I was able to get some information from the World Health Organization, and so on and so forth. And that was pretty much it. Now, I would like to give a special thank you to my tech support. And that guy over there, he's the boy down the street. And we met when we were 6 years old. And so shortly before I got polio. And he used to come to my house. He only lived 4 doors away. And he used to come to my house and play with me and my brother, and we had a lot of fun. And one day, he was going to come up and play, and his mom said, "You can't go up there and play with the little girl in the corner." And probably asked why, and she said, "Well, she's very sick. She's in the hospital, and the family has been quarantined." And she explained to him that meant he can't come out and play. So she said to him, "You're just going to have to wait." So he did. He waited, and he waited, and he waited some more. And finally, in 2018, I guess he decided to wait long enough, and he finally asked me to marry him. So that's my sweet, loving best friend in the whole world, my husband, Peter.
Very nice.
And so the PS to all of this is all about you, and thank you. Oh, thank you. So, I want to thank you and your club and Rotary International. You have recognized the need for continued immunizations toward the global, the goal of worldwide or global polio eradication. And again, thank you.
Thank you, Kate.
God bless.